Hello viewers. This is the story of a boy named Darren, whose funeral is today. His family and friends are very saddened by his death. But at this moment, we see in the coffin that Darren is still alive. And not only that, he is playing video games inside the coffin with great enthusiasm. He does not know that outside, he is being buried alive, believed to be dead. Why is this happening to him? Let's uncover the whole story. But before we get to this point, we need to go back a little and see that Darren's life was going very well. He was very popular in his school and had good friends. Not only that, he was excellent in his studies, making his parents proud. Darren had a childhood friend named Steve, who was not only Darren's best friend but also a negative influence in his life. One day, Steve went to school and told Darren that he was late for class, so both of them went to the school roof. There, Steve started breaking the school bulbs with stones and then challenged Darren to do the same. Then the teacher heard their voices from the roof while in class, leading to both of them getting caught, and their parents were informed about their mischief. Since Darren's parents always considered him a good student, they were shocked and disappointed when he came home. They started scolding him and asked him to break his friendship with Steve. They felt that Darren was becoming a bad student because of Steve's influence. The next day, while going to school, Darren told Steve that his parents wanted him to end their friendship. Hearing this, Steve became sad and accused Darren of never standing up for himself. An argument started between them, but then a car passed by them. The man inside threw a poster towards them. Darren and Steve picked up the poster and started reading it. They discovered that a circus called the Free Show was coming to their city that night, so they made plans to go to the circus at night. Later, in class, Darren was caught by the teacher reading the circus poster hidden in his book. The teacher snatched the poster from him and showed it to the whole class, warning everyone not to attend the circus because it featured illegal acts. However, Darren and Steve ignored the warning and secretly went to see the circus that night. It turned out that both of them liked strange things. Darren was a big fan of spiders, while Steve was obsessed with vampires. At the circus, they bought tickets from a dwarf man hidden behind a curtain. This man, who looked like a creature, bit Steve's hand when he reached out to him, then ran away. The boys quickly forgot the incident and headed inside the circus. The show's host, Mr. Tall, came on stage and introduced the first performer, a wolfman who frightened the audience. Mr. Tall then directed the wolfman towards a woman in the audience, and the wolfman severely injured her hands. However, her hands started healing almost immediately, astonishing the crowd. Mr. Tall revealed that the woman, named Korma, was part of the show. Next, a performer named Alexander took the stage, demonstrating his body's lack of ribs. Following him was a girl named Gertha, who had incredibly strong teeth capable of breaking anything. Then came Ramus, who had 2 stomachs and could eat anything. Ramus amazed the audience by eating a 3-wheeled bicycle on stage, chewing it up and spitting it out. After Ramus, a beautiful lady named Madame Truska came on stage and invited Darren to join her. She told Darren she wanted him to be her assistant for her magic act, and he agreed. However, as soon as Madame Truska touched Darren's face, she started seeing his future, which was terrifying. She became frightened and ran away from Darren. Suddenly, hair started growing on Madame Truska's face, which she quickly cut, returning to her usual form. The audience was thrilled by the magic and applauded loudly. Madame Truska was so frightened after seeing Darren's future that she begged the circus leader, Larten, to stop the show. We will learn later why Madame Truska was so terrified of Darren. Despite her repeated requests, Larten did not listen and took the stage to start his magic act. Larten brought his companion, a spider named Octa, onto the stage. He began to play an instrument and dance, and Octa danced along with him. During the performance, Steve recognized Larten as a vampire. Steve had read about Larten in a book and told Darren that Larten's real name was Various. Meanwhile, their teacher arrived with the police to shut down the show. To avoid getting caught, Darren and Steve sneaked backstage. Seizing the opportunity, Darren stole Octa from Larten's room because he had been captivated by the spider at first sight. Just as Darren was about to leave the room with Octa, he heard Larten approaching and quickly hid. Larten entered the room with an old man, discussing the Vampaneze. The Vampaneze were hybrid vampires who killed people to drink their blood, unlike Larten, who only made people unconscious to drink their blood. Meanwhile, Steve revealed himself to Larten and declared that he wanted to become a vampire. Steve explained that he hated his life because he felt alone. His father had left long ago, and his mother became an alcoholic. Since then, Steve had been fending for himself. After Steve's repeated pleas, Larten agreed to consider making him a vampire but insisted on a blood test first. When Larten tasted Steve's blood, he realized that Steve had a lot of evil inside him. If Steve became a vampire, he would become a powerful and dangerous one, killing people indiscriminately. Consequently, Larten refused to make Steve a vampire. Enraged, Steve cursed Larten and stormed out. Larten then discovered that his spider, Octa, was missing and began searching for her. Seeing this, Darren panicked and fled. Darren ran until he reached the road, where a car suddenly appeared. Two men inside the car grabbed Darren. This was the same car from which the circus poster had been thrown. The men, named Murlaugh and Mr. Tiny, questioned Darren and realized they had kidnapped the wrong boy. They were actually looking for Steve for some unknown purpose. After realizing their mistake, they dropped Darren off at his home without explaining anything. The next day, Darren took Octa to school in his bag. Steve saw Octa and started playing with her, but by mistake, the cage fell from his hand, and Octa started running away. Darren tried to catch Octa, while Steve chased her with the intention of killing her. Octa ran into the hall, causing all the students to panic and scatter. After some time, Octa was about to escape through a window, but before she could, she bit Steve on the cheek. Steve fell to the floor and became unconscious due to the spider's venom. Desperate to save Steve, Darren went to Larten, told him everything, and begged him to save Steve's life. Larten initially refused to help, but after Darren's repeated pleas, he agreed on one condition. Darren would have to become his vampire assistant. This meant giving up his family, friends, and entire social life. Desperate to save Steve, Darren accepted Larten's condition. Larten pricked Darren's hand with his nails and mixed his vampire blood with Darren's blood, turning Darren into a half-vampire. Afterward, Darren and Larten took Steve to the hospital, where Larten administered an antidote to counteract the spider's venom. Steve began to recover, but Darren's life was forever changed. After a few days, Darren started craving raw meat after becoming a half-vampire. One day, he even felt the urge to suck his sister's blood. Terrified of what he might do, he retreated to his room, where he found Larten waiting for him. Larten warned Darren that he should leave his house because he could become a threat to his family. Initially, Darren didn't want to leave, but then he remembered his recent urge to drink his sister's blood. He decided to leave to protect his family. However, he was afraid that his sudden disappearance would cause his parents constant worry. Darren told Larten that he had to die for his family, and he needed Larten's help. That very night, Larten came to Darren, broke his neck, and threw him from the house, making it look like Darren was dead. Now, back in the present, Darren's funeral was underway, while Darren lay alive in the coffin. On the night of the funeral, Larten dug up Darren's grave and took him out. At that moment, Murlaugh, the leader of the Vampaneze, arrived and attacked them. Larten managed to trick Murlaugh and escaped with Darren. Meanwhile, Steve was devastated by Darren's death. Darren had been his only friend, and now Steve felt completely alone. Overwhelmed with grief, Steve contemplated suicide. Just as he was about to jump from the roof, Mr. Tiny appeared and stopped him. Mr. Tiny told Steve that he knew everything about his life and his dream of becoming a vampire. He offered Steve the chance to become a vampire. Here, it was revealed that Mr. Tiny, along with Murlaugh, was also a Vampaneze. Mr. Tiny told Steve the truth about Darren, that Darren was still alive and had become a vampire. He also instigated Steve against Darren, saying that Darren had stolen Steve's dream of becoming a vampire. Infuriated, Steve accepted Mr. Tiny's offer and went with him. Meanwhile, Darren was gradually making friends with other people at the circus. He was helping others and training himself, but he missed his family and Steve a lot. He often looked at their photos on his phone. One day, Darren became very emotional and tried calling Steve. Larten intervened, snatched Darren's phone, and broke it because he didn't want anyone to know Darren's truth. Then, Mr. Tiny showed up. He wanted to talk about Darren, revealing that Darren had special powers since birth, which made Mr. Tiny want to keep him. When Mr. Tiny asked Larten for Darren, Mr. Tall said he would consider it. After Mr. Tiny left, Larten told Darren not to leave the circus because the Vampaneze could pose a threat to him. Larten then began training Darren so he could protect himself. With training, Darren's skills and strength increased. On the other hand, Murlaugh turned Steve into a Vampaneze, giving Steve evil powers and transforming him into a devil. Steve first hunted down his school teacher and killed him. Meanwhile, Darren was very hungry, so Larten took him to a nearby field, made a man unconscious, and asked Darren to drink his blood. But Darren, having a pure heart, did not drink the man's blood despite his hunger. They returned to the circus, where suddenly, a group of Vampaneze attacked. A dangerous fight ensued, resulting in many casualties. The Vampaneze had come searching for Darren. One of them found Darren hiding in a room with a girl named Rebecca. A fight broke out between Darren and the Vampaneze. Larten, Mr. Tall, and their companions arrived just in time to save Darren. The Vampaneze fled. Later, Darren and Larten discovered that Murlaugh had kidnapped Rebecca. The next morning, Darren set out alone to find her, believing that all the trouble was his fault. Meanwhile, Mr. Tiny kidnapped Darren's family to lure him into a trap. Darren returned home to see his family, but found the house empty. He noticed a postcard on the table, on which Mr. Tiny had written that he was waiting for him at the circus. Larten decided to confront the Vampaneze and began gathering his weapons. Meanwhile, Darren returned to the circus and saw Rebecca and his family hanging on the wall. Noticing Steve with the Vampaneze, Darren realized Steve had become one of them. Without hesitation, Darren attacked Steve. At the same time, Larten arrived and began fighting Merla. Due to his refusal to drink blood, Darren was weak and started losing to Steve. Rebecca managed to free herself and urged Darren to drink her blood to regain his strength. Initially, Darren refused, but Rebecca reassured him, saying, "Nothing will happen to me. I will be fine." Hearing this, Darren reluctantly drank her blood, gaining his strength back. On the other hand, Larten was gravely injured but did not give up. He fought fiercely and eventually stabbed Merla in the heart, killing him instantly. Rejuvenated, Darren resumed his fight with Steve. At that moment, Mr. Tiny appeared and stopped the fight. Using his special powers, Mr. Tiny revived Merla and transformed him into a monstrous creature. Mr. Tiny offered both boys a chance to join him. Darren refused, choosing to stay on the side of good, but Steve, consumed by anger and betrayal, chose the path of evil and left with Mr. Tiny. After the battle, Larten hypnotized Darren's family, erasing their memories of the incident. In the final scene, Darren returned to the circus. The members welcomed him warmly, making him feel at home. With this, the incredible story concluded.